Hey, Crystal Maiden here, and welcome to part 2 of Minish Cap. Festery seems to have a similar name to the Elder, but he doesn't really... There's no confirmation that he's actually related to him. And there's also another character who has a name similar to the Elder, but he has the generic Minish sprite. The Minish village doesn't really have any facilities to it, like a hospital or a grocery store or a school or anything like that. It's nothing like Hyrule Town. So I don't really like it the way it's designed. Yes, Eslo, I know that you can open locked doors with a key. Really? See what I mean about hand-holding? Really? I never knew that. And you can't turn that off either. I don't find him that annoying because you can get through his text extremely quickly. If the text moved as slowly as it did in Link's Awakening, then Eslo would be unbearable. But because you can get through his text so quickly, I don't find it to be that big of a deal. Unless you're forced to stop and stand still for a while before he starts talking, then it can be kind of annoying. I don't know why he can't just pop up instantly. Instead you have to wait around for a little while, like the game's loading his text. I hate when that happens. I didn't mean to jump off that ledge. And that's not just the GameCube controller, that's happened to me other times. I love the dungeon design in this game. I always look forward to coming to a dungeon in this game. Even though there's not that many of them, I still feel like the dungeons are just so much more enjoyable than A Link to the Past. There's so much to them, and of course they look a lot better. But they also got a lot of puzzles that I really enjoy. Like the mushrooms. You pull on them, and depending on how far you pull, you'll be sent flying a certain amount. And it's usually obvious how much you have to pull them to get to where you need to go because of the dark gray markings on the floor. Pushing that block does nothing because it resets to its original position later on. Which is really stupid. That hint is actually pretty useful because it sort of helps you figure out that you can actually push jars in this game. This is the first, and as far as I know, only Zelda game to have it so that you can push a jar and bring it to another position that way. Because you can't pick a jar up and then place it lightly somewhere else. So, in this game, you can push jars and send them to switches and stuff. But that's not very intuitive, so it's good that you were at least given a hint that you can push the jar. But considering it's a completely new and unique mechanic, I would rather if Eslo just outright told you that you can push a jar. Because occasionally, he doesn't actually give you a hint. But he still pops up and says something. So it kind of wastes your time. This dungeon has a lot of unique enemies to it. Like it has these things that fall from the sky, and you just keep on moving ahead and you'll probably get hit. And they aren't really that big of a deal though. This puzzle stumped me when I was younger, but all I have to do is just do what I did here. If you didn't pull that statue as far as I did, then you would have had the second statue block your way. These enemies are annoying because they can move around really fast in unpredictable directions as soon as they get going. So it can be kind of hard to no-hit run this room. While I didn't record it because I didn't have a Game Boy player at the time and I wouldn't have felt like it even if I did, I actually did a segmented no-hit run of this game in my free time. And it wasn't that hard no-hit running the dungeons, although occasionally I saved really often so it wasn't that big of a deal, but occasionally I'd get hit and I would turn the game off as the punishment to myself for getting hit. And that sort of helped me improve my gaming skills by teaching me to closely observe the enemies to figure out what exactly they're going to do and where they're going to go. And so I could predict their movements and avoid getting hit by them. Because enemy movements are a lot more predictable than they are in Zelda 1. They're not erratic, so it's easier to avoid getting hit. These enemies are, I think they're called puffstools, and they're really annoying because unless you throw a jar at them, they're invincible. You hit them with the sword and it just knocks them back. I'll show you how you can defeat them later. The music here is pretty intimidating, I like it. And the boss itself can feel intimidating because there's all these blocks all over the place. Where the arena is so cramped, you can easily get yourself hit, and there's a huge time pressure to get to the heart and attack it just before you run out of time. But if you don't, it's easy to run into the blocks or get touch damage when you're trying to rush up to the heart. So, the Gust Jar is pretty unique. Like, Skyward Sword had sort of a reverse version of it, where you blew out wind, and that could also clean up dust. But this was the first instance of such an item. And the Gust Jar can suck up dust and reveal switches and chests and stuff. Well, I don't think there are any chests it reveals, but it can reveal switches that create chests. And they're also the only thing that can render these things completely vulnerable. Although you have to be standing there for a long time to get them to become vulnerable. The longer that you hold down the button for the Gust Jar, it'll start changing colors and start sucking up faster. But it doesn't really seem to make a difference in gameplay. There's no point where you need to have it so that it's red or whatever. This also stumped me as a kid, for some reason. This is another point where Eslo is completely useless. Like, really? How are kids supposed to figure out that they're able to use the Gust Jar to suck a lily pad towards them, when the lily pad is presumably on a lower plane than you are, because you're holding the Gust Jar above the ground, and so you shouldn't really be able to suck a lily pad towards you. It's not very intuitive, and Eslo is no help at all. Now, I don't know if it's supposed to be endearing or whatever, but it just makes him feel like a failure of a guide in that instance. He just gives out extremely obvious advice, but sometimes in the most unintuitive of puzzles, he's no help at all. I mean, it's kind of like skewed priorities, isn't it? And it's kind of hard not to get hit here, because the lily pad has a slippery momentum when you're making it move. It'll keep on going even when you don't want it to. And you have to start using the Gust Jar in the opposite direction to get it to stop moving forwards. And even then it won't stop instantly. You can take advantage of the Gust Jar to bring the mushrooms towards you, which is a pretty inventive way of taking advantage of it. You don't really use the Gust Jar for dungeon puzzles that much after this one, though. Like, you don't see dust again, except in one area of the overworld. And I like this concept. I also like the fact that you can get pieces of hearts in dungeons. Like, I absolutely love that. I think this was the first top-down Zelda to ever have pieces of hearts in dungeons. But I love the blue and red portals. Like, the blue portals appear after you defeat a mini-boss. Or, in this case, This is the only dungeon where the blue portal appears for a reason other than you beating the mini-boss. And the red portal takes you directly to the boss room. And here's where we really make use of the fact that you're technically really tiny right now. Because that's an ordinary green choo-choo. But because you're so tiny at the moment, it becomes this huge, intimidating boss when you fight it here. But of course, because of how Link works in the overworld, he can't really attack. Even if he could face green choo-choos in the overworld in Minish Woods, he wouldn't be able to fight them like this boss. It's only in this kind of boss room that he can face off with the choo-choos. And I like this boss, it's pretty interesting. Although it really highlights how slowly Link backs away and moves from side to side when he's using the Gust Jar. Because it feels like the choo-choo is moving faster than him. It also feels random when the choo-choo will drop his head and where it'll drop it. So it can be kind of hard to avoid getting hit here. But just keep using the Gust Jar to suck up the bottom of him, I guess. And eventually his head will start swaying from side to side and eventually fall down. It can be kind of hard to predict when it'll fall down and where. That was a pretty interesting boss concept. There's a lot of interesting concepts in this game. This isn't very interesting of a concept though. I guess it's created for a Zelda game that you collect the essence of the elements. But there's the Earth Dungeon is not a very unique concept all by itself. There's plenty of forest dungeons in Zelda games. Although this particular forest dungeon has a lot of creative concepts in it for a Zelda forest dungeon. Like you've got the giant barrel and you step on a switch and it burns away the vines, allows it to roll around. And you've got the dust that you can vacuum up. And the unique enemies in there. Pretty unique for a forest dungeon at least. But then you've got the fire dungeon, which is pretty generic, although it still makes use of unique puzzles because of the item you get. And you've got the ice dungeon as well, which is also a water dungeon, and it's really generic for a Zelda game. I still like the concept of getting the elements though. You really want to approach these things whenever you find them. They'll be really useful later. And we just talked to Bellary, and he's apparently related to Festery and the Elder. But because he's a very important Minish, but he uses the same sprite as the generic unimportant Minish. And I feel like that's really lazy. Like any important Minish, they should give him a different sprite. It feels like the Minish sprites are incredibly lazy. Because with the humans, every human has a different unique sprite. It's not like Pokemon at all. But the Minish, they usually have the same sprite over and over again. And there's different types of Minish, but there isn't that much variety within that type unless you're talking about the town Minish. These enemies are kind of annoying, but if you just stand in one place when they're rising up out of the ground, and just keep on mashing the sword attack, then you'll easily kill all of them. He always says that every time one of them blows up. It just feels like it sort of pads things out. Why can't it just blow up and then I just walk away? And there's a pretty weird glitch here. Go to where Smith is in Link's house. I'm in the wrong room for this, but if you hit the bottom wall of Smith's room with your sword, a part of it will make a sound that indicates that you can blow up the wall, but you can't. It's as if blowing up the wall was dummied out. And weirdly enough, using a bomb on the south wall in Smith's room makes it stop making that sound and allows you to push it. Although pushing it doesn't really have an effect. And it's not like in Link to the Past where every character says the same thing over and over again, no matter how much you progress in the game. In this game, every character, their dialogue changes as you progress. Like even Smith, what he says changes as you progress through the game. I'm not going to be showing off all of the dialogue this game has to offer because that would take forever. In Link to the Past, I talked to every NPC, but in this game, that's not really practical. Because even if I talked to every NPC, they'd have different things to say as I progress. And here's where we get introduced to the most unique thing about Minish Cap, and my favorite thing about it as a whole. The Kindstone system. Well, I guess it's pronounced Kinstone, but I always called it Kindstone when I was a kid, so that's what I'm going to continue calling it for the rest of the LP. Now, the Kindstone system has a lot of problems to it. It's too randomized, and it requires you to backtrack through the overworld to get the treasure that you unlocked. Like, I hate how there's no in-game checklist showing off every single Kindstone that you fused. And a Kindstone fusion is not specifically tied to a certain NPC. Like, you can make it so that you see a NPC, but you don't have the right Kindstone to fuse with them. And then you decide not to fuse with them, and you go back to them later, but when you try to fuse with them again, they offer a completely different Kindstone type. So it's randomized. And that randomization is going to make it kind of difficult to fuse all the Kindstones in the game. I'll rant more about that later on.